I think we have been hearing to a lot of physical medical topics so far. So today, I think apart from communication skills, all of them were mostly focusing on symptoms. Today, we have a very different session, and which is very, very important. As we work in palliative care, we know that how important it is to address grief and bereavement, and how many a times we feel totally unequipped or untrained to deal with that particular topic many a time. So I think this is a very important learning session for all of us. And I'm so glad that we have David Oliviere with us for today's session. And I'm sure you all might have heard about St. Christopher's Hospice. So he was a former director of education and training at St. Christopher Hospice, London. And currently, he's a consultant in psychosocial palliative care in UK. He's a social worker, counselor, and educationist. He has traveled to India so many times. I think I met David when I started palliative care and attended one of the conference, and Dr. Raj introduced me to him. And last year we wrote to him. He kindly agreed to take a session for last batch also. And there were a lot of interactions and compliments and comments from the participants. So we could not spare David's time this year also. We really wanted people to learn from him. So again, here this year, we are here with him. You can see he has jointly edited books, mostly to do with loss, grief, bereavement, and death and dying in palliative care. Resilience, which is a very difficult and very less discussed topic as far as palliative care is concerned. And he's also a joint lead for a new theatre project that is Stories That Speak. So thank you, David, for joining us for today's session from UK. And thank you so much, all the participants. As we mentioned in the beginning, it will be good to see your faces for some time so that we can feel that we are talking to people. And till he finishes, we'll be disabling the chat option because it might be distracting, because the topic is very sensitive and intense. So we want no distraction during the session. Thank you so much. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Dr. Sri. Welcome, everyone, to the landscape of loss, grief, and bereavement. It's really going to be a quick tour of a very variable landscape. Lots of bumps, maybe lots of beautiful areas, lots of risky areas around loss, grief, and bereavement. So I'm going to be giving you a very busy, what I call death by PowerPoint. Lots of PowerPoint slides, including some I won't cover today, but I wanted you to have it, for example, about bereaved children. We haven't got time to cover certain topics, but I've included some of my basic teaching slides around the needs of children and particular needs and how one might respond. Similarly, with overviewing some of the core skills and some advanced skills that we use in palliative care. This isn't specifically a session on communication skills. You've done quite a bit of that, I imagine, in your training, but everything I'm covering relates to good practice in communication or illustrating things that don't always go well. So towards the end of the PowerPoint, there are some handouts which I thought you might find useful. So after the session, I will be giving Panim India tips at the copy of the slides for you to have as reference for your own study. And it includes some extra handouts that you might find useful and suggestions for reflection. I'm always in awe and a bit scared speaking to doctors, because I was brought up with that little voice in my head that doctors are gods, and I've never managed to dislodge that. although I must say some of my best friends and colleagues are doctors, and we have worked very closely together. But I was so impressed seeing the list of yourselves, where you work, and imagining the skilled work. I'm just going to select out one doctor by way of welcoming you all. Dr. Manesh from Saroj Gupta Cancer and Research Center in near Kolkata, where I was born. So I'm a bit biased towards Saroj Gupta Cancer and Research Institute. They're a wonderful place. I was there a few times for offering some training, as well as taking groups of health professionals from around the world, and we were there in March, and their hospitality was second to none, and the group fed back lots of positive things. So Manesh, thank you if you take that back to your colleagues. And I really appreciated and felt when I was with you, and I think this would be the same for lots of us here today, lots of your other colleagues, Manesh, Dr. Manesh, from a lot of colleagues from all states. I really felt at Saroj Gupta Institute a whole veil of spirituality, whatever we mean personally by that. But people went an extra mile. We saw things in a bigger perspective. So I'm thanking Manesh because I saw him in March, and as a way of thanking you for all the work you do. And I hope I bump into some of you if I come again to India. I bump into some of you in person.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So I'd like to put on the slides now. Hope the technology works. Colin Murray Parks, the psychiatrist at St. Christopher's Hospice and the London Hospital, whom I had the pleasure of working with for a while, said that the pain of grief is just as much part of life as the joy of love. It is perhaps the price we pay for love, the cost of commitment. So just hang on to that and think about it. And greetings from London this afternoon and this evening for you. So a lovely opportunity to be with you. And I want to thank Dr. Shedevi for her invitation, and Dr. Rajgopal. It's an honor to be linked with yourselves and Pallium India, and through you to this evening, a number of states and services across the country. It's a real privilege. I want to also just stop and thank Raju, who's head of the virtual education tips. I think, I'm sorry if I'm getting the titles wrong, but Raju, you've been a huge help in the background. Thank you for keeping me sane and answering all my multiple questions. My first trip back to India, I left India when I was 8, Kolkata now, and I didn't think I'd ever come back, but I was somehow asked to come back and speak at the IAPC Congress in Mumbai in the mid-1990s. And I was put up, I was even put up at a very posh hotel. I come to India to have a little bit of luxury as a speaker on that occasion anyway. And then I was cared for by the Dr. D'Souza's Shanti Avedna, as it was called, ashram then. And the big question for me, I was already working at the North London Hospice as a social worker and counsellor. I was intrigued by how in India people grieve and respond to the loss that one finds constantly in at the end of life for people as caregivers, patients, staff, and so on. And I remember the day I left to go get the taxi to come back from Mumbai to London. I took a picture of this welcome sign, which isn't there any longer in Bandra at the Shanti Vedna. But what I do remember was a mother and a sister on the veranda crying and crying and crying. The son and this brother, young man, about 20, had been taken off the streets and brought in the night before to be cared for by the sisters and the staff there. They were doing an absolutely wonderful job. And he died in the night, and the family came to the hospice to see where he had been cared for. And you know, I looked at them and I thought, they're no different to any of the families and caregivers that we work with in London in our hospices. And so it made me think a lot about commonality and difference. I like commonality and difference, and you know, people are human wherever you are in the world. Cicely Saunders, founder, as we say, founder of hospice and palliative care around the world, said, go around and see what is being done and see how your own circumstances can produce another version. There is a need for diversity in this field of palliative care. So I'm sharing this with you to say it's very important that you are your service develops differently from what I'm going to describe. But please take anything you might find useful for you and use it, but more importantly, adapt it to your context and your circumstances. So what about loss, grief, and bereavement? It affects everyone from birth to death. You all looked very young, younger than me when I saw your pictures, but you couldn't have reached adulthood without already experiencing many, many losses in your life. And with it, maybe skills in knowing how to adjust after a loss. I'm showing you the picture of Princess Diana and a famous one of her sons, Prince William, who has talked very openly about his bereavement and how he didn't get the help that he always needed and wanted. So loss, grief, and bereavement is a healthy human response. The main teaching point at the moment I want to stress is that it's not an illness. You don't need counselors. You don't need specialist workers to hold your hand constantly. Human beings have ways of adjusting and coping. You do need help of professionals, of course, when there are quite more complex situations. And of course, we need all the things that doctors and nurses and others can offer. We don't need just professionals trained in loss, grief, and bereavement. We need healthy communities. We need compassionate communities and the community models that work. So I just want to make sure that you don't think helping grieving people is only for trained professionals. The communities matter. And you hear the phrase, you know, we need increasing grief literacy, some understanding of the mechanics of what makes up grief and how best to support people. So we need healthy societies and healthy communities, religious communities and all sorts. Just to say, I've never, one common feature of bereavement is that people weep and cry. Across any of my, in the 500 years I've worked in palliative care, I haven't come across anyone who's been actively harmed by crying. It's a way of expressing ourselves, a way of expressing our emotions and letting out our feelings. And these are Greek ladies, but in a lot of places I've worked in the world, it's clearly a common way of responding to the emotional pain of parting. And thinking of context, I'm just using this to remind all of us how devastating lockdown, COVID, the fears, the changes in working practices. And I do admire my colleague, doctors, nurses, people who are having to see patients and risk, to some extent, risk their own lives. Patients and families feeling absolutely locked down, locked up, also staff. So just we're remembering the different contexts and the number of people where a number of families and friends where there was no chance to say goodbye. The last view of someone, maybe their loved one, going away in a car or ambulance, and all the usual processes not happening. And just even being able to hold the hand, stroke the hair of your loved one. So we're expecting a tsunami of need, of emotional need, of bereavement and loss that's still being expressed and will be after a long time. A reminder that you need to take care of yourselves. I hope you're all, but you know, when we do any of our work, when I trained as a counselor, I thought I was going to be given some good things to say, that I would know what to do, say, and have some comforting words. A lot of the training was understanding myself, understanding my own emotions and what I brought to the helping relationship. But remember, emotional pain can be catching. And so we can take on board some of the feelings for the families that and the sadness, the families we work with. So the importance of looking after yourself. And in palliative care, I found through my experience and experience of colleagues, there's a lot of contradictions, paradoxes, ambiguity. It's all about shades of grey. So often, particularly in psychosocial palliative care, which I'm talking about, there are a lot of shades of grey. It's not black and white, but also people bring their own personal strengths, ways of coping, their skills, their own resources. Because just think, we cope with so many moments of sorrow, deep sorrow, but also of joy. People want help, but they also don't want to know, in many ways. They want to keep us at arm's length. We see adversity, but we also see achievement. And that's one of the definitions of resilience, but being able to adapt in adversity. And now we don't always think of bereavement just being negative and life stopping. We also see people growing, adapting, changing, new opportunities. I'll explain the thinking behind a famous spiritual writer, Henry Nouwen, saying, when his best friend died, I have lost a friend, but I've gained a companion for the rest of my days. When I go through the models of palliative care, the models of bereavement we use nowadays, that should be self-explanatory. In our day center, we asked the patients attending to draw a crest, say something about themselves. You know, a crest or a badge often is something to do with one's identity or something you want to say to the world. And this patient said, we are strong, no matter how ill we shall be. And that comforted him. So I'd like to summarize the nature of loss, grief, and bereavement. As an example, I met Sanjeev in a part of India I was working in and visiting, and I went out with the doctor, the nurse, and met and the counselor, and met Sanjeev and his family. I spent some time with his 18-year-old brother talking about what was happening to his ill brother. And the family were running a shop, and they lived in this room where Sanjeev was photographed. Sanjeev's mum died when he was 8, and he left school and never returned. He wouldn't go to school. And the nurse here from the palliative care team cared for him, helped him with his personal care and dressings and all kinds of things very frequently. One day I dared to ask Sanjeev about the pile of books that was behind him. You can't see the pile of books, but I was quite intrigued because they looked like quite complicated textbooks. And Sanjeev was a very determined young man. He, as much as possible, went on his motorcycle for his chemotherapy and made sure he got to his outpatient clinics and really managed his illness very well. The books were all accountancy books because his big dream was to qualify as an accountant. And right up to the time that this photo was taken and I visited, he was waiting for the results of his accountancy exams. And it was lovely that he learned that he had passed his exams, and he and his family were totally overjoyed. It was the best gift they could have. And sadly, he died 2 weeks later. I'm sharing Sanjeev's story because it's full of the patient's strengths and resources. And more, we need to really build on them. And you know that as experienced professionals, there's so much that the patient and family, or we can draw out of them, because they've been through life, they've learnt how to adapt to difficulties in life, and they may be trained in certain professional skills, they may have brought up families, they have a wisdom of their own. And it's really important not to forget in the whole equation that people bring huge strengths to their illness and to the experience of loss. I'm going to skip 1 or 2 slides. So bereavement, as with a lot of other components in the work we do, there are 3 major components: the affective, the behavioral, and the cognitive, the thinking, the feeling, and the doing. And it's all bereavement, loss, affects all those aspects of life. Loss, change, separation, transition, crisis, and to some extent trauma all have very similar processes. And you recognize EB phases and stages, different components as well. And one institute defines trauma as a stressful occurrence that is outside the range of usual human experience. And that would be markedly distressing to almost anyone. You've all seen patients in trauma experiencing traumatic bereavement and traumatic reactions maybe to you giving them news and so on. And of course, we wonder where the experience of loss and bereavement starts. And it said, you know, just the experience of leaving the womb is the first major loss for people. I hope some of these slides at a personal level for you don't bring back too painful memories if you've had a stillbirth or anything like that, which can be so very painful. So loss in the Oxford English Dictionary is described as a disadvantage or suffering caused by being separated from something. And in a more detailed definition, the Oxford Dictionary uses words like robbed, dispossessed, plundered. They're pretty powerful words. Another definition is the disappearance of a significant object or attribute which has been given high physical, emotional, or psychological survival value for the individuals concerned. This is the person's subjective experience of the loss, since loss of a particular object or attribute for one person may have a different value for another. I'm just going to show you one object that I have on my shelf in this little office of mine. And so I think can you see that? I think it's Lord Krishna. Yeah. I was given, this is precious to me. I was given it by a very good friend who was actually a consultant at King's College, London, and became one of our patients. And he asked his children if they'd give this to me after he died. So the value for me is particularly the linked with my friend and who became our patient, John. So this is something quite important. And of course, for some of you, Lord Krishna would have a totally different meaning and value in your lives. Often it's the particular meaning. I've had a colleague who I did loads of home visits with, a nurse, and one day she told us she was diagnosed with cancer. And somehow the team hadn't been prepared for that. It seemed like it was okay for the patients to have it, but not somebody you knew so well, was like a sister to you. So the meaning of that news changed completely. So I'm going to ask you in a minute to give me one or two examples of how loss and bereavement affects people physically, emotionally, psychologically, and socially. And I've listed here a number of, a whole range of losses, not just through death, but even as basic as losing your car keys or PIN numbers, or moving home, going to a new state, a new part of the country where you perhaps feel a little bit out of it, foreign, different. In the ranking of bereavements and losses, the last one here, the death of a child, is seen to be the most difficult and painful of the range of losses. So some simple definitions: that grief is thought to be the very personal experience, that excruciating pain and crying that I saw in Bandra, Mumbai, with the mother and daughter. Mourning thought to be more of a process, a societal process, or cultural process occurring after a loss. Bereavement, a turning point in personal development, a psychosocial transition, changes in the psychological and social processes in people, and that can carry a risk to physical and mental health. And I'll say something about models of bereavement. So bereavement, it said, is what happens to you. Grief is what you feel, and mourning is what you do. I'm really simplifying it. I'm just wondering who you'd be most worried about when you walk into this room. This is Munch, 1895 in Norway, but it may be a patient's room in a hospital or at home that you go to tomorrow. And of course, we start our assessment not necessarily through reading a lot. When we continue our assessment as we see people, we pick up the nonverbal signs and messages. I think I would like to know who you'd be most worried about. I think I'd be concerned about the man on the right facing away from the family. Sometimes you're noticing the person who's quite isolated, not always the one making the most noise in the family. But when I prepared this slide, I remembered a daughter who said to me, I'm not a doctor, but our team was going in, but that day was my turn to visit the daughter and the patient, and the daughter and her father. And she shouted at me, "Don't give him the morphine, it upsets me." And I just wanted to remind you about, you'll be expert in India, of the impact of families, the interaction of families as systems that act and interact on each other. We're very rarely just dealing with a patient on their own without taking into account the context, the communication, the cohesion, the conflict in the family. So family, work, and loss go together. So bereavement is a single event with multiple consequences. That stone, that image of the pebble or stone that's thrown into the water and the ripple going out. People often think of grief as an emotional experience. It is, but it is also a physical, intellectual, social, and spiritual experience. So let me just maybe, I'm going to ask you to just for a couple of minutes call out how you find bereavement affecting people physically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. I'm just making sure you're there and making sure you're still awake. So anyone like to suggest? Just brief comments, please.
Hello.
Hello, Manesh.
Hi. Good evening, sir. So I had an experience in my family when my grandfather died in COVID. He expired due to COVID and at his own home only. So we were there. We were actually taking care by wearing PPE. We used to go there and take care because there was lack of beds. And my mother actually wasn't able to visit him. During that period, I only made a video call to talk to him.
Sorry, I missed that. Your mother?
My
Sorry.
my mother's father actually expired. Yeah, my grandfather expired during COVID at his own home when there was lack of beds. And
Manesh?
my
Yeah.
yeah yeah yeah. So my mother
And
actually couldn't visit his father even till his death actually. So I and my some of my close family members used to visit him and give him BiPAP and some supportive medicines during that period, but he couldn't survive. And my mother actually still has that regret and still grieves sometimes because she couldn't visit her own father,
yeah, yeah,
up till his death.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Manesh.
Um,
Yeah, the pain of parting and not being able to visit, and yeah, and the sadness goes on, and when one thinks again about that situation. Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to contribute? If not, we'll go on. And I'll yeah, so we're Back to shared screen. So sorry. So this is just a guide for you. You might have much more sort of detailed symptoms and reactions to the different areas, the physical, because we're appetite, and intake of drugs, alcohol, maybe increased somatic symptoms, and dying of a broken heart. I don't know if that's talked about in India, but it's often noticed that
Professor David, we can't see your slides. Can you try to share it again? We are not able to see it.
Yeah. Try again.
Yes, sir.
Can you see it now?
Not yet.
No. It's I can see it on my screen. I'm not quite sure what else I can do.
Can you click onto the share screen in the Zoom you see? In the Zoom page you are in, just click on the share, a green button mid bottom.
I can just see new share.
I think you need to stop the share first and then try again.
Oh, stop.
Yes.
Yeah, it has come now.
It has come now.
Oh,
I
okay.
think it is
Yeah.
due to the delay of network, because it was showing started screen sharing. Now we can see.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so there are some familiar physical reactions, cognitive, intellectual, you'll be very familiar, all with implications for practice. The fact that memory can be poor, confusion. But when I went through a very traumatic situation of loss, I needed to see my GP, my family doctor. I couldn't even remember the phone number. Just getting there was an ordeal. A friend had to take me. It was just the state of mind I was in at that point. So the implications for practice, writing things, making sure things are written down, things are repeated, asking the patient to repeat, making sure a relative or friend knows what action's been agreed, etc. Just simple things. Then the social, the isolation that people find so difficult, the change of status. You've never been a widow before. You don't know how widows behave unless you're very clear from your culture how you need to behave. Somebody from India told me very recently the worst thing that happened when her husband died was she had to go into formal meetings or social occasions on her own. And, that hadn't happened for most of her life, adult life. The facing others, finances, practical adjustments, and the spiritual, the why questions. Why me? Why now? I've been good. I've always followed my religion. And you'll be familiar with many of these questions that come up. Why is God doing this? If there was a God, why has life become so cruel? Now I'm having difficulty moving the slides.
Just press on that screen and then try to move it. Click on the screen.
Yeah.
A mouse
great.
click.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're there. And I want to remind you about crises, like the crisis of a loss. there's some good things that come out of it. People move on from the crisis. You know this after Breaking Bad News and the shock and the horror of it, how many people move on to thinking more constructively about their lives. And it said,
David, actually the
yeah.
slide hasn't changed yet.
Oh gosh.
Yes, perfect now. Yes, it's changing.
And crisis holds potential for change, and it's often said that it means opportunity rather than just something negative. And one of the most important descriptions of grief, loss that I've come across is by Bowlby. And he says, the loss of a loved one is one of the most intensely painful experiences any human being can suffer. And not only is it painful to experience, but also painful to witness, if only because we are so impotent to help. Working with people going through a lot of loss and bereavement has an impact on us because we feel empty and we can't take that pain away. We feel impotent to help. And when they've lost a loved one, when a loved one has died in fantasy, you can't give them what they want, is that the person is there again, undo history. So it is painful for us who are trying to help people as well, or it can be. So I want to just go through particularly three models that has been helpful to me in understanding loss, grief, and bereavement. And it's two of them is what we teach more now. The first one, but the first research on bereavement, we're told, is interviewing a lot of the survivors of the Coconut Grove fire in Boston, the US. And a number of young people died. And it was like the first time there was a study of the reactions of the survivors, somatic and bodily distress, guilt, hostile reactions, ability to function as before, and also developing the same traits as the deceased in people's own behavior. I once worked with a family with 3 young children. The eldest was 12 and father died. Father was 42 and he died of abdominal cancer. And as the weeks went on, the 12-year-old son started walking quite in a stooped way. His gait was quite awkward and he was bent over, holding his tummy, holding his stomach and abdomen. And of course, the mother had to take it seriously by asking him to see a doctor. But his gait and the way he moved was so similar to his father's in the last few months when father was walking in that way. So I'd like to recap on what we call the phase and stage models, which some of you will be very familiar with. And this involves the disbelief, the no, can't believe it, it's not true. When my father was diagnosed with cancer, the day my mother phoned me and she said, Dad's been to hospital and he's got cancer, oral cancer. And I said to my wife, no, it can't be. Dad's never been to hospital. He's never been ill. And I know doctors and nurses make mistakes. This was the mindset I was in for 2 weeks. And then the anger crept in. I was very angry with the doctor for not sending him to the hospital earlier. And he was about to have surgery, major surgery. And I kept saying, why did a dentist have to notice it and send him to the doctor? And then there's often with dying people, we come across, don't we, as a bargaining phase. You'll be very familiar with Kubler-Ross's work, and the depression and recovery. I always remember a lady in one of the wards who kind of didn't want to speak too much, but she was very low most of the time and very elderly lady, looking rather depressed. And one day she called me over and she said to me, "I'm ready to sail out of my harbour. I'm ready to sail out of my harbour," rather like a ship being ready to sail. And she'd done her grieving work for her own self, her own death. So there are lots of different names for different phases and stages. The Bowlby, who wrote a lot about separation and attachment, these were his the separation processes. And there are others
David,
that...
Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to check, are we on the bereavement slide right now?
No. Oh,
That's what, yeah, that's what
sorry.
are saying.
Now, what are we going to do about this? Do I need
think
to...
it's the delay with the network, Raju.
I think it's because of the internet problem there.
Do I need to close the PowerPoint completely and
David, can you click on the screen and try to change the slides?
I think for him it is moving. He's on the right slide, but for us, we are on the bereavement slide. I think that's the problem.
I'm on now model 2, dual process model. No.
No.
I'm moving back now.
No.
Can you see?
So David, can I share the screens from my end? I have your
Yes,
slides.
please.
Yes.
Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
If there's a... Is there time for a quick question while we're doing that? Or Raju is probably going to put on the slide soon.
Let me know which slide you want to start with again, because we haven't seen this phase for stage models and all.
Yes, the models, the second part of the talk, part 2, model.
Yes. Can you see this screen, model 2?
Yes.
I can't see anything other than few faces.
Can you swipe your screen?
There we are. I can see it now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me know when you want to move the slides. I can do it.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the second model. I find this very useful, and this is what we've been teaching for the last, I don't know, 15 years or so, that bereavement is not just what we see on the left-hand side here of stages and the traditional stages and phases. It's also about getting on with life. So it's thought that there are 2 modes. I'll use my hands to explain. There's the traditional loss, crying, grief work, separation from the loved one, breaking bonds, and really looking at all the sadness and experiencing those emotions and separation. But there's also another mode, if you like, which is called restoration, getting on with life, attending to life's changes, adapting, doing new things, maybe new friends, having times when you're not grieving, you don't feel sad and crying, and maybe taking on new jobs, new hobbies, new interests. And healthy grieving now is, in this model, the dual process, is thought to be an oscillation, a movement between the 2. So some days you might be getting on with life, you might be laughing, you might be just going to work and forgetting that your mother or father or even child has died. And another day you might be back in the loss mode. And healthy grieving is thought to be a balance between those 2, the movement between those 2. So I remember the lady who we used to contact all our families and offer a visit or some contact if they needed help about 6 or 8 weeks after the death. And I phoned this lady, and her husband had died. She lived alone. And I said, I talked to her, and I said, would you like me to visit? And she said, oh, you can come if it makes you feel better. You can come and see me if it makes you feel better. Of course, that wasn't the point of me visiting. I was going to assess if she needed help. But that day she was in restoration. She was getting on with life. But tomorrow she may be back in loss. It may be a special religious festival that she and her husband always celebrated. It might be his birthday. She might have noticed his slippers still in the kitchen and got reminded of him. So you see, that understanding is that people don't just go through phases and stages and feel that life is they're more adapted to life. It can go on for a long time, if forever. Because, you know, as we know, people remember their loved ones right through their life and celebrate their lives. So the next slide, please. Yeah. Raju. Hello.
Can you see the?
Yeah. So the third model I want to share is one that a client, person themselves, a bereaved person, helped develop. So the next slide, please. Thank you, Raju. I won't touch my keys, Raju, in case I make it worse. So this is quite a different model. And this was actually drawn by a lady whose child had died. And she said, if you look at figure 1, that was her world before her child died. And then she was in a group, a therapy group for bereaved people. And she said she drew figure 2 here, because a lot of people said in her world, her bereavement would shrink and would take on a proportion of her life. See, there's her world, the blue circle, and the small yellow circle, which depicted her loss, which would get smaller and just take a proportion of her life. But she said it was like that for some people, but it wasn't like that for her. And she drew figure 3. She drew her bereavement the same size as her world, the yellow circle, but she said she drew an oblong shape around that loss. And she said her world took on a different shape. Her world grew around her bereavement. So I wanted to share this with you because this is quite an important change from the way we used to think about bereavement, that there is a growth, that people do all kinds of wonderful, very positive things. If you just think of the numbers of people whose children have died, whose husbands and wives have died, and they've put a lot of energy into setting up new NGOs, charities, helping others, and using their skills, raising money for good causes. So next slide, please. So this is to summarize this model, that you change and you grow, and your world changes. You're never the same again. You can't get back what your world was, but you can grow and develop. Next slide, please. So that's been quite helpful, and I've used it generally in counseling with people, not necessarily when they've been bereaved. And I've actually drawn it for people, and because people say, you know, how long will my bereavement go on for? And you can't you can't easily answer that. It'll go on for as long as it goes on. Next slide, please. Yeah, and we can only work with what people give us access to. Next slide, please. So this is just to say we can only work with what people are willing to share with us. Our professional skill is often getting to the other parts below the waterline. And I think it'd be interesting to know from you, but I think there's maybe a very different model we use in psychosocial care. I don't know if you'd agree that maybe the medical model of trying to reduce symptoms, or, if there's a wound, you put a plaster on it. But for the psychosocial model, often the response is trying to open up the wound and let it open, let the pain come out and be expressed. So it's just to bear that in mind. But Dr. Sridevi and Raju, can you hear me?
Yes,
We can hear you.
Yeah, in view of time, we're coming up to 8 p.m. and I wanted to take a few questions and then to explore the case study. Jay, I'm wondering whether we should stop the slides now. There's one major part to do, but people can have the slides. I'll await your guidance for me, Dr. Sridevi. And I take one or two questions now, and then we go on to the last part, which is thinking about a real clinical case study, which is Jay.
Are there any questions from the participants?
Apologies for that. Yeah, it's just unfortunate. I'd prepared a number of different slides, and particularly the last part is what you can do about it. But any questions so far? Anything you'd like to contribute or you disagreed with? So it's just come.
There is one question in the chat about how much time it will take for the grief to subside.
Yes. The question from Manish. Thank you, Manish, for that question. It's really difficult to say because everyone is different. I found with particularly when there's an extremely traumatic or painful death, including, for example, a child or baby dying, the first year is often a time when people are just getting through, often not being able to express the usual emotions that one sees. And sometimes it's only in the second year that people, after the anniversary, may be having some celebrations around the anniversary of remembering the loved one, that people, the second year, people start to open up. We found that generally with the hundreds of people, family members we see in palliative care, that, and this is based on UK, I'm talking about UK culture, that the first 3 months, the first 3 to 6 months is often for people like it's not really happened in fantasy. The reality isn't really taken in. Oh, it's like he's gone on a business trip again, or he studies a long way away, things like that. But the real pain of grieving needs to come out, really, for people to be able to move on a bit. And sometimes that happens between 3 months and 12 months. At 12 months, people are recalling in glorious technicolor very sharply the day the doctor gave the diagnosis. You know, as we know, people remember, families remember where they were standing, where the doctor was standing, when the doctor might have put an arm on the patient's shoulder, whatever it was. And the memories come back very sharply of the death. And with it, feelings wash up and come to the surface again. And a lot of our bereavement services are planned to make contact maybe nearer the year again, and recognize for people who've needed a lot of therapeutic help, that maybe after the year, we may have a celebration, like some rituals, tea, and some talks, and families meeting each other. I know some services in India do those kind of things, and it's often quite a long time. So that's not a clear answer, because it varies from person to person. If the person wasn't a very close relative, it's generally much quicker. The old queen, the queen mother, whose husband, the king, died, she was asked, "Does it get better?" And she answered, "No, it doesn't get better, but you get better at it. It doesn't get better. The pain is there, but you get better at it." And I wanted to share that with you today, because I think that's another way of looking at it. You get skills to deal with the situation. Sorry, there was another question.
Yeah, so it's about how it affects the treating physicians. So Dr. Prakar was telling recently they lost a young girl in our ICU and the whole team was affected. So how this affects the treating team?
Yeah. They lost a girl in the what?
In the intensive care.
I think it's really important for the team to share it, because it's really painful, particularly when it's a younger person. It's been sudden. You've all been involved. You've done your best. It's really it's a team support that's needed, and sometimes somebody who's not involved with the team so closely can facilitate just maybe 1 or 2 sessions, or more even sometimes, when it's a really painful death, just so people can express what that patient meant, their disappointment that they weren't able to do more, or whatever it is. That patient might have reminded them of their daughter or someone, someone like that. But like day to day, patient dies, and then by the time we come back on duty, the whole thing has moved on. There are other patients, and sometimes one can forget the feelings that a member of staff might have had, and spent a lot of time with the patient who's died. But I do think there's staff support needed to be built in when there is a really painful death that's affected everyone. Sorry, I'm just giving a really quick answer. So, Dr. Shetty, shall we move on to the last part?
Yes,
is that okay? Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll have to think what we can do, because I'm really conscious that quite a lot of teaching material I've not been able to share with you, but maybe Dr. Sridevi and I will speak and see what you'll certainly get the PowerPoint, the points to go through. So we'd like to introduce you to a patient scenario, a real patient. We're calling him Jay, And I think you've had the handout and a chance to read the case scenario. I hope you have. Yeah. So maybe we can close the slides, and I don't know if that will help the picture, but we're going to meet Jay. Jay has come specially to meet you today. And he's a member of the palliative care team, is visiting. We're going to meet Jay for 5 minutes, no longer. And it's not to teach you communication skills in the role play. It's for you to get a clearer idea as to Jay's needs. And then you're going to have a small session in small groups to think about really how you would respond to Jay's needs. That's the main discussion. What are Jay's main needs and how you might respond? What might your strategy be? Because he's experiencing a lot of loss. And then we'll begin to wind up and have any further questions. Okay, so I'm just wondering if I need to shut anything. I can only see you.
Yeah.
Part of my screen. Is that okay?
Yes, because we have because it's a role play, we have put 2 people, me and you, on spotlight. So after that, we'll be seeing everyone.
So I'll just carry on. I'll just go and get Jay. Is that all right?
Yes,
Dr.
please.
Devi,
Yes,
thank
please.
you.
Yes, please.
Come in.
Hi, Jay.
Hello.
Good
Hello,
afternoon.
Ames. I'm wanting Ames. But no, not urology. Oncology. Oh, these people. Who are you? Can I
Hello,
help you?
Jay. Yes, Jay. I'm Dr. Sri from palliative care team. We are here to check on you, just to see how you're doing.
I don't think I need you. I need my chemotherapy. That I'm trying to get my chemotherapy. Wait a minute.
Yes.
Hello. No. Chemotherapy. I want chemotherapy. No, not palliative care. No. Oh, on-call. Oh, bloody idiot. Not educated. Can't even understand. You please tell me who you are.
Hello, Jay. We are coming from the palliative care team. I'm Dr. Sri. I would like to check on you, how you're doing with your medications and your
Dr.
symptoms.
Sri.
Yes, Jay.
I don't need medication. I need chemotherapy. I've got all my workers there, 50 men waiting for me to go back to get the work done. They can't do without me.
You see, you are very concerned about your work, Jay.
I got Enterprise of the Year 20 years ago. Kerala Enterprise of the Year. You understand? I've been leading in all that project, and now they're waiting for me. She goes every day early, leaves me with the boy and one bag for catheter, and then no car. So what would you do? They won't give me chemotherapy. Doctors always going to conferences, going away, writing research. They don't want to see patients. What sort of doctors are they?
I can see you're really, really upset about it, Jay.
Well, wouldn't you be upset?
Please.
Oh, I'm sorry, doctor. I'm trying to sort out my life, and but nobody wants to help. Nobody wants to help. Honey. All the beautiful names, booklet, glossy booklet. That's all they want. They want money to do more research, not to help, not to help. No one to talk to, no one to ask. I just become pencil.
You see that you're going through a lot, Jay. We're here to help you. Would you like to talk to us?
I don't want morphine. I heard morphine, palliative care is morphine. I don't want to sleep. I want to get to office. That's all I want. I don't ask for much. And now only the boy to help me. She doesn't want to know. She busy with work. What sort of help can you give?
Jay, we can keep you comfortable. We'll help you to go through this journey. We'll help you to cope with the illness better. So we are here to help you in whatever way you want.
Will you come back to see me?
Yes, definitely yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So that was a little taste of Jay on a first visit that was made to him. And one of the things he said a few times before we left, and the visit ended up, it's quite exceptional for us, but the visit ended up taking 2 hours. And he said several times that I'm just pencil. I'm just a pencil, he said. So we're going to ask you to go into your groups. Raju's going to put you into groups for a few minutes. And we'd like you to just very quickly brainstorm on what the main areas of loss for Jay, and what your plan of intervention might be. Just, we're going to ask you to work very quickly, and then maybe when we come back, we can just take a little bit of feedback, and I will ask you what you think Jay meant by saying, I'm just a pencil. Thank you, Raju. You all in. Welcome back, everyone. I know it was very few minutes, but I guess you're all used to, as doctors, working very quickly and in just a few minutes. I'm amazed when I go to OPDs in India, how the caseload you have, the workload is huge. So can we take some feedback? I'm not audible.
Yes, you are audible. Sister, can you check your audio?
I can hear now. Earlier I was not able.
Okay. So yeah. So any comments about Jay's needs? What do you see as the main needs that Jay has at the moment? Just one or two contributions.
He was not really aware of what is his health status, and he has no faith in doctors. All the time he seems to be blaming the doctors that they are not concerned about the patients and particularly him. So it's a kind of his focus is only on his work, though he would like to get himself healed, but the right way to approach his sickness is not being he was not able to do that. So it's we have to work on him so much to make him aware what's his health status and how he has to handle himself first of all, and then how he has to approach the whoever is the medicos attending on to him. And so it's a long process. It's a very long process. First of all, faith in doctors is very much required, more than he has got some biased ideas that palliative care means only the morphine. So it's a very, very wrong basic concept that he's
a lot of misconceptions. Yeah. So thank you for in the chat all your feedback. No one cares for him. He doesn't understand what you can do, and wants to thank you. Any other comments on his needs? Loss of job led him to depression. Desperate to get back to work and reinstate his life as before. So what strategies? He needs proper counseling. Thank you. Any other comments about the strategies? Where would you focus the priority? I mean, can you actually get to talk symptoms and medical management before you do other things? What would your priority be?
We need to assess what is his condition exactly and how much he knows about his sickness.
Yes.
And then we can also know whether the chemotherapy, it is not told that chemotherapy may not help him. We can also see that whether chemotherapy will help him or not. Once when we know what is exactly his condition is, how much he knows about it, and what the doctors have told him, and whether chemotherapy is going to help him or not, then we will be able to assess, take him further into it, or to help him. Accept the situation first. At present, he is denying his sickness and his ambition to look. That is a kind of covering up, that his work and his concerns are diverting him from the pain and anxiety what he has. So we need to bring him back home to himself with his sickness first.
Yes, thank you. Well said, Doctor. Thank you for that summary. And several people have said in chat he needs support, counselling. I would say, in-depth listening to somebody mentioned empathy. His support for his loved ones. Because we don't know what the wife, her story is, or her view, or how she's feeling about everything, that there may be resources there that can be brought if she had some understanding as well of his condition, and they could have some help in being a husband and wife again, if assuming their relationship had been supportive or harmonious enough. So I think he needs a lot of listening to, a lot of warm empathy, and I must say, although this wasn't the purpose of the role play, Dr. Sridevi did demonstrate that, you know, she was just absorbing and noticing and being empathic in her responses, because he was full of his anxiety and anger. So it's getting behind that that's important. And to finish with, would anyone like to suggest what Jay meant by saying, I'm only pencil, I'm just a pencil? And he repeated that several times. What do you think was behind that?
Maybe he has lost the value of his life, but he doesn't have the he is not considered an important person in the society, or he has not lost the value of himself in the society.
Yeah, thank you. And also Dr. Prakar, loss of sense of purpose, loss of value. He used this phrase, and eventually we got behind it when he felt safe enough. He had a bit better rapport with us, and he felt a pencil. He'd be just like a pencil if he died. Rejection, but he said that a pencil you can just rub out, you can erase. And this was his big fear, that when he died, he would just be like a pencil, and the memory of him, his worth, would just be rubbed out like you can with a pencil. So there was a big spiritual element to the work in just recognizing his whole being and his whole feeling about himself was worthless. He thought would just be worthless, and that lay behind some of his angers in this case towards doctors, but you know, rejecting, making it hard for the palliative care team to really come in and do their job. Yeah. So thank you for that. It's time. Well, I've got a whole day ahead of me, and I'm going to meet for a meal a dear colleague from India, from Mumbai, who's in London for a week or two. So I'll be telling them I enjoyed this, but I'm so hugely disappointed, and it's no one's fault. For it's the way it is with IT. I wasn't able to talk you through the whole journey, the whole landscape. So you will get copies of the slides, and maybe Dr. Sridevi and I might have some ideas how we can still support you with this topic, because I think you've been shortchanged, as they say. You haven't got the proper full teaching. Thank you very much. I'll say good night, and it's been lovely to see so many of you interested and, you know, giving up your evening as well. I'm honored. I'm seeing some lovely messages. Thank you. That's so nice of you. And you know, if we bump into each other at a conference in India, do come and introduce yourself. To be nice to meet you in person. And thank you for those of you who've made contributions as well. So I'll say good night to you. Do I do? Yeah.
Thank you so much for the wonderful session. I know that we cannot teach the landscape of grief, loss, and bereavement in one session. It's a vast area. So probably sometime in future, we'll be able to make it a little elaborate, more number of sessions for people who are interested and really want to train themselves in grief and bereavement, how to deal with that in their day-to-day practice. Thank you so much.